Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. A little more than 2 years ago, voters in the 6th Council District elected Helen Rosenthal to represent them. Her district covers most of the Upper West Side of Manhattan, where I've lived most of my life. I even had the same job she has now. So we have a lot to talk about, and I'm delighted that she's my guest today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
It's good. So it's been a long time since I was in the council. Actually, not that long, but what, about 15 years?
14 years.
Yeah. Has it changed a lot?
The council?
The district.
The district has changed. I think the council has changed a
Oh,
lot.
that's a lot. We'll come back to that.
Okay. I think that this district, I can't speak to other districts, but truly tells the story that Bill de Blasio likes to talk about. The wealthy are getting wealthier, and the middle class is having a harder time living on the Upper West Side. Our mom and pop stores continue to leave because they just can't afford the rents. And I'm trying, most of my time is spent helping people whose incomes are below maybe $40,000 or $50,000 a year.
And the rents are so high.
Unbelievable.
So you really, if you're a middle class, or not even, middle class, you have to live in subsidized housing or you can't possibly live there. Isn't that pretty true?
Well,
how much rent control do you still have?
We have about 30, I want to say that's too high, about 6,000 units of rent control, more of rent stabilized.
Yeah. It's a terrible tale for us, isn't it?
It is. It's harder and harder for the middle class to live in the district, and
it's getting to be in the borough,
right?
Or
the
in the
way
city.
that it shows itself is that the schools are getting tremendously overcrowded. So, for example, remember the Trump buildings that perhaps you were even a part of looking at, that land use deal for Trump Towers to go up from West 72nd Street down to roughly 60th Street on the west side. It was the assumption back in 1996 that because these buildings would be luxury condominiums or luxury rentals, that those families would send their kids to private school. And there was very little accommodation made for a public school. Here we are, many years later, 25 years later, and the public school right in that zone has been overcrowded, twice over.
And that brings other questions
rezone.
because you've got one that's overcrowded and the other. I remember that many years ago when we talked about pairing of schools, and it's never really worked out that well to the benefit of making them equal schools. Yeah?
That's right. There's another school very close by that is not in as good a condition, where the kids score less, and where the school is primarily zoned to a NYCHA, a public housing project. My feeling on that is not only do we need to, desegregate, but also we just need to lift the standards at that school. Yeah. And there's a new principal now. She's been there 2 years, and the effect has been tremendous. She already is lifting the school, and she'll continue to do so.
So let's talk about how the council has changed.
Yes. I think it's changed tremendously. The main change, I think, is that from the last session, where I was not a member, and so I only know about it from stories, is that with rules reform, there are so many equalizers now in the council. The distribution of funds that council members are given to spend in their district is now an equal number, only modified by poverty. So I get a base number, and I get an additional amount because there's a tiny bit of poverty in my district. Richie Torres, who represents the Bronx, and I know you've had him on his show, he's tremendous, he gets 3 times as much as an add-on for poverty. So that type of equalization has been tremendous.
When I was in the council, you couldn't even get your bill up unless the speaker approved of it.
Yeah.
There was no way you could do that. You couldn't do anything, basically. What we were very proud of is if we got 10 people to vote against something that Giuliani was supporting and the speaker was supporting. So that was where we went.
It's a different time. I find my legislation is given real a real look by the lawyers. I discuss it with them. If the legislation doesn't make any sense, we sort of toss it. Where there's stuff that I think is really important, we work hard to find a way in the law to help make a change that'll be better for New Yorkers.
So the problems in the district, I guess, are housing, affordable housing, schools, and small business? Or
The loss of small
that what it
business,
is?
those are actually the exact three. Were they the same when you were the city councilwoman?
It's so funny, I don't know if I even thought about it. No, I don't think the affordable housing had reached that point yet.
That's right.
And
that makes sense because all the financing deals have
and we
come
didn't have
due.
the big new buildings and
Right.
all that kind of stuff. So the whole city was a little bit more.
That's
a
right.
little
So in
better.
the last 10 years, the financing deals that have kept these buildings, the Mitchell-Lama buildings, in affordable housing, the time has come due. And some of those buildings have chosen to go private.
Yeah, that was too bad. We had a few that did that, and it also made a difference. But we didn't have the big buildings on 100th Street and Broadway or the luxury. And I don't know what your property taxes are.
Outrageous.
I loved the New York Post editorial that wants to go back to pre-Bloomberg property tax.
Well, the issue on the Upper West Side, similarly creating the divide between rich and poor, is that because of those expensive luxury condos have gone up or buildings have converted to a luxury condo, our assessments have gone up. So in my building,
Even if your building isn't one of those new luxury buildings,
That's
it's
right,
all
your
based on
assessment goes up.
You're based on the rental value in your community.
That's right.
And if those rental values, if they're selling for what, 8, 10, 20, $100 million, then your assessment goes up. It's untenable, basically.
correct.
And you can't, that is a cost of maintenance of living, and if you can't afford it.
That's right.
So then what do you have to do? You have to sell your apartment and try to move someplace else. It
In
doesn't make
Queens.
sense.
Yeah, it doesn't. People can't stay on the Upper West Side, and that's a real loss. I want the teachers, the PTOT physicians. I want them living in the.
So what are you going to do about the property tax?
That's a great question. As you know, it's a thorny one. It's a very thorny one, and the leaders need the political willpower to get in there and hash it out. As you know, making a change will mean that single-family owners will likely see an increase in property taxes. Someone's going to have to see an increase. Look, I think that property taxes, and Bill de Blasio was asked this question when the budget came out, while we're not increasing the tax rate, property taxes are going up because of the assessments. And I think we need to figure out a way to stop that. And I would like to see, and I said this directly to the mayor, I think what he's choosing to spend his money on, I admire him for it. It's just the stuff that I would do. It's why I voted for him. But I would also like to now see some cuts to property taxes.
Well,
and I think there's money in there to do
the
that.
421A, is that the legislation that allows these large apartment luxury housing to get the tax abatement?
Well, that's exactly right. And that's where, last time around in 2010, somebody allowed 5 developers to get grandfathered in under the wire. They get huge property tax breaks on these luxury buildings for affordable housing that was built 20 years ago. And let me tell you, anyone who buys a $100 million apartment can afford $250,000 in taxes, not the $25,000 that they're now being asked to pay. It's outrageous, and our city's infrastructure will suffer because of it.
But 421A is part of the mayor's housing plan.
Yep.
So that's where it's wrong.
Well, I have a lot of questions.
It is a problem of balancing all these things.
That's right.
If you did away with the tax abatement on the luxury houses, you'd have revenue to come in, right? But then he wouldn't have the affordable housing that's built off-site. So
On-site or
there must be a
off-site.
way. There must be a way that he could that
Well,
would
that's what
balance
he's counting
out.
on,
Yeah.
is that there's mandatory, inclusionary, affordable housing. So it has to be in the building.
Yeah, but it can't be if you don't continue 421A.
That makes it complicated. I
Yeah.
think, they're fighting very hard in Albany to bring it back.
Yeah, but I don't think we should want it. So that it's a very life is much more complicated than it appears, right?
Absolutely, and different districts want different things. You know, on the Upper West Side, I would be very happy to downzone our area and negotiate every building that wants to build higher than what the zoning allows. Currently, there are five high-rises that are going up in our district as of right. In other words, there's no review by the community.
Mid-block?
They're, 70th in Amsterdam, for example. There's going to be a 55-story high-rise going up as of right. No community review, no community benefits.
So do your problems mirror the problems of the rest of the city?
I don't think so. You know, I'm really stymied when I hear what my colleagues are talking about. For example, in this discussion about mandatory inclusionary housing, there are three options for the developer and the council member for when what the mandatory piece would be for affordable housing. Would it be for people at an income level of $30,000 or $60,000 or $80,000? Most of my colleagues would like to eliminate the $80,000 option. In Richie Torrey's district, again, the average income is $22,000. On the Upper West Side, the average income is $156,000. Very different. And most of the city is more akin to Richie's than mine.
It's a very interesting kind of problem. But the problems with youth and crime and that kind of thing is also not reflected that much in your district.
That's right. That's right. There's some, for sure.
Yeah.
And, unfortunately, it usually pops up in the areas of public housing. Now, what we can do, I say we because I'm sure you did the same thing when you were a council member, is use some of our discretionary funds to give additional money to the police precinct or the public housing tenant association to try to have more after-school programs for those kids, something to keep them occupied and off the streets. And I'm doing that as much as possible.
Yeah. You're the chair of the contracts committee. So what does that mean?
Well, it doesn't mean, I'm going to start there. What it doesn't mean is that I review individual contracts. What it does mean is that I can think hard about procurement reform.
Could you,
so the way
review individual contracts?
I don't.
But could you?
Well, let me give you an example. When the Department of Education wanted to let, and indeed voted to let, a $50 million contract to look at its IT systems, its networking throughout the schools, I cried foul. They had originally come in the day before the vote. The value of the contract was $1.1 billion. Overnight, it came down to $650. They voted on it and passed it. I cried foul. The Daily News cried foul. And ultimately, City Hall overrode the veto, pulled that contract, and made the Department of Education renegotiate. And it came out and was just passed in December at $435 million. That's a $200 million savings to the city. If you go to the larger number, it's a $700 million savings to the city. That is an example of an individual contract that I pulled. But my takeaway thought from it, and we're preparing for a hearing later this month or next, is what is going on with procurement at the Department of Education that kind of contract could have been agreed to by the CFO of the Department of Education. How did that slip by? How have they changed their internal process to flag those types of contracts?
So the Board of Education doesn't have to go through the mayor's office?
No, it doesn't. They have their own board that votes to approve them. And, I, that night, argued vigorously for them not to approve the contract because it was, speculative.
So would you consider, for instance, Rikers Island, what kind of contracts do they have that are outside?
Sure. A big one is for the physicians.
The health thing. So do you look at that contract?
I would like to look at that contract. I think that there are some reforms. I think that the health professionals should have a bigger say within the Department of Corrections. That is something I'd like them to be able to negotiate for. One of the challenges there is that contracts, again, actually go through the Board of Corrections. And the point of view from the Board of Corrections is more towards safety than health. So the healthcare providers are put in a very awkward position when they see mistreatment of the inmates.
They should close the whole thing down. It's a very good idea. They'd most likely save money. You like the budget, and you like to work the budget, and you like to understand the budget. If you had your druthers and we had a charter reform or something, would you change the way the budgets are prepared?
Well, I don't know if it needs charter reform. I do think it's good public policy for every mayor and every commissioner to take a step back and think about what that agency is doing, whether or not there are redundant or not relevant anymore things that they're doing, and try to achieve savings. That's simply good fiscal and responsible management for the use of our taxpayer dollars. You know, I signed a letter that was spearheaded by Dan Grodnick and the chair of the Finance Committee, Julissa Ferreras,
asking council member from the east side. Right?
Yeah, asking for a 5% reduction for all city agencies. I signed that letter because I do think there is waste in government, and it's our job to root it out and get rid of it. There are things that agencies are doing that are no longer relevant. And that's part of the work, the angle that I'm coming to it from is, as chair of the Contracts Committee, trying to do procurement reform and look at, for example, the Department of Parks and Recreation. There are 70 steps that they must go through to go from wanting a change in Central Park to actually letting the contract and getting the work done. 70 steps.
So how long do you think it'll take to build a stable in Central Park?
Great question. That was my question at the hearing too, that I have very little understanding from the administration how they think they'll be able to start the work by October and finish it by 2018.
For how much money?
I have no idea.
But what do they say?
They say 25 million as an estimate. I feel very uncomfortable with that number. And it's important to me that, you know, whatever the amount is, that the costs get weaved into the value of the franchise that ultimately gets let. Like the way that the city put money into Tavern on the Green, and the city will recoup that money through its franchise agreement with the restaurateur.
Do you, in the budget process, do all all whatever you call them, does the federal government, is it the president that estimates the revenue?
For the city of New York?
No, for the United States.
Oh, I have OMB. I'm sure it does.
So is the fact that the mayor estimates the revenue in our budget, does that not put the city council at a disadvantage?
Well, certainly. And
so would that,
and
would you ever support a change that way?
There's no doubt it favors the executive branch when the mayor puts out the revenue estimates. There are staff within the OMB Finance Division that come up with their own estimates. The IBO comes up with its own estimates. The state controller, the city controller, and the Citizens Budget Commission come up with their estimates. When the city council is negotiating and looking at the city's budget, we are mindful of our revenue estimates. And there's no question in my mind that that is a tool that the executive uses to either raise or lower expectations for what the revenue is coming in at, and therefore what our expenditures can be. There are lots of places where the mayor can hide money in the budget, no doubt.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about budget. What about the salary increases that are proposed?
Right. Every elected official. So what happened was the mayor appoints a commission. They hold public hearings. They held 2 public hearings. And they produced an extensive report. It's over 100 pages. If you want, I could happy to send it to you for nighttime reading. And they recommended increases for every elected official. there's controversy about the increases for the city council for a variety of reasons, and that I'm happy to talk about. But first, let's be clear about some of the things they suggested, which I fully support and love. Most importantly, that this position go from being a part-time position to a full-time position.
What do you estimate now? How many members approach this as a full-time?
As a full-time, the vast majority, I would say 45 of the 51.
Really?
That's my point of view.
Yeah.
I see it as a 100-hour-a-week job.
Exactly. But you don't have that many members that have other occupations.
I don't think so, no.
That's interesting.
It's a handful, a handful. So moving it to a full-time job is a great professionalization of the job. It means that we're taking it seriously as a full-time, 100% of your energy is focused on this position. I think the state should be doing the same thing. And it, especially as we've seen what has happened to the two leaders of the Assembly and the state Senate, having a full-time position is a great idea for ethics
and it's
reform
compatible
as well.
because the office itself is expected to be full-time operation.
That's right. That's right. I get calls in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Well, not always calls. They're often tweets in the middle of the night.
But your offices are open.
Open.
Full-time.
All the time. And now with technology, emails, tweets, Facebook postings, there were two instances so far in my 2-year career where at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, I got a tweet saying, oh my goodness, the street, 103rd Street between, West End Avenue and Riverside is totally flooded. Help us. And I got in my car, called, the Office of Emergency Management, and I was there and, made sure things were taken care of. Similarly with a Con Ed outage somewhere else in the district. So there's no question it's a 24-hour job. Not as hard as parenting, but very challenging. So that reform, I think, is significant. The other reform that's significant that I know you have experience with is the notion that if you're a committee chair, you get an additional amount of money. That has been taken, the commission recommends that get taken away.
It's arbitrarily decided. Is
Well,
it still arbitrarily
no,
decided?
not at all. I
Oh.
mean, that's one of the things where
Yeah.
I really credit our current speaker. Not only does she not use it as punishment or reward, she gave a pretty plum chairmanship to a council member who was not very polite to her in the press. And yet she gave him a plum chairmanship with the $8,000 additional money that comes with that. Regardless, that piece should be taken away. I think I like the fact that the job would be full-time. You would get no additional funds for being a chair.
Yeah, in my time, some of the chairs got $25,000 and other chairs got $2,500.
Wow.
Totally arbitrarily, and you never knew who got what. But they like it because it goes to your pension calculations.
So that's all been done away
Go
with.
ahead.
100%. We will vote on that change. In fact, it's a separate bill than the pay raise, those reforms. I like them a lot. They're very important. We should do them. As for the pay raise itself, I think that people are complaining that the number that the City Council has proposed is $10,000 above and beyond what the Commission recommended. Now, if you look back, the City Council members, although I've only been in for 2 years, have not, and I knew what I was getting myself into, have not gotten a pay raise for 10 years. So if you look at what the increase is compared to, divide it by 10, the amount of the increase is along the lines of what other public sector unions have gotten, I think less than firefighters, but along the same lines as DC 37. So the amount, and I think if you look at equivalent jobs, I would argue, it might actually be less than equivalent jobs. It's roughly the same amount as an assistant commissioner in an agency. Deputy commissioners are higher. Commissioners get paid higher than that.
I agree with you. I mean, I think the issue is a non-issue. I just think that it's...
What I don't like is that we're voting ourselves a pay raise because it will
mean
be
it doesn't- it
retroactive,
doesn't
start with the next term.
Yeah.
Now, the commission recommended that because council members haven't seen a pay raise. I
So
think
what?
that's pretty
I think it's
outrageous
just-
that you vote
I think
yourself
it's
a
just
pay raise.
an object that people find easy to attack. I mean, it's reasonable. I don't think that is. It's right. Don't
I
you
work
agree?
very hard, and I think my constituents would agree. I work
Yeah.
very hard.
Yeah.
I think it's very unseemly to vote yourself a pay raise, and the notion that it would be retroactive. I would prefer that it be
was
start next term. I think the mayor has done an admirable thing by saying he will not take the raise until next term.
Yeah, but it's sort
He
of
works
like,
hard too.
I understand that. So why doesn't he take the raise? I mean, it's sort of like I'm going to serve, but I'm only going to take $1 a year. I mean, that is not right.
Yeah,
I don't like that.
I don't disagree.
Right. So, what do you think the future is?
Well, I'll tell you what the future is in my mind's eye.
Yeah.
For the next 2 years, for sure, I continue to serve in an environment that I think is very progressive and where we've had a lot of terrific reforms and the door is open for more. So what I'm focusing on is one, procurement reform. It just hurts my head that there are 70 steps in the Parks Department to get something done. 70 steps in 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. So we need to get that down to 30 steps. And the second thing I think we need to really focus on is DOB, the Department of Buildings reform. I think the commissioner himself is doing a great job. I know he has a hard task, but what the city does is look at problems from an agency-centric point of view. The Department of Buildings is looking for problems with the way construction happens. The Department of Health is looking at mold or a Department of Health point of view. Nothing is done from the tenant or resident point of view. And we need to flip that so it's resident-centric.
Right. That's a very good way of looking at government.
Yeah.
A lot. So we've come to the end of this program.
No, it ain't so.
Yes, it is. So I'm glad you seem to be enjoying this job.
I'm loving it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being a
Please,
role model.
Don't be ridiculous. But anyway, thank you for coming. I'm sorry that you're not my council member anymore. That is not a good thing.
Just by a couple of blocks, yes. So we're going to need you to move back in.
Okay, after the census, you can redraw it. Thank you very much, Helen Rosenthal.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. If there are any people you'd like to hear or topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016. Or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.